Have you ever wondered why your grandfather smiles so big when he hears a loud engine roar down the street? Imagine a time when gasoline cost less than a candy bar. Imagine a world where every car looked like a rocket ship and sounded like thunder. This was America in the 1960s. It was a decade of speed, chrome, and pure power. Back then, car companies weren't worried about saving fuel. They only cared about one thing, being the fastest on the block. They called these machines muscle cars. These weren't just vehicles to get you from point A to point B. They were rolling pieces of art that could burn rubber and leave a cloud of smoke behind. But this wasn't just about fast cars. It was a secret war between the biggest companies in the world. Detroit was the center of the universe. Engineers were breaking company rules to build monsters in their garages. They were putting giant engines into small cars to see what would happen. The results changed the world forever. It was a wild era that burned bright and ended fast. If you stay with me until the very end of this video, I am going to reveal the holy grail of muscle cars. It is a car so rare and so powerful that most people think it's just a myth. You won't believe how much it is worth today. Before we get to the legends, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to see how a small group of rebels started a revolution. The year was 1964, and the rules were about to be broken. In 1964, the car world changed forever. It all started with a man named John DeLorean. He worked for Pontiac, which was part of General Motors. At that time, the big bosses had a strict rule. They said you could not put a racing engine into a medium-sized car. They thought it was too dangerous and too loud. But John and his team did not listen. They were rebels. They took a huge 389 cubic inch engine and stuffed it into a car called the Tempest. They named this new version the GTO. They stole that name from a famous Ferrari racing car. The bosses were angry, but it was too late. The car was a massive hit. The GTO was like a lightning bolt. It was cheap enough for young people to buy, but it was fast enough to beat almost anything on the road. It didn't have fancy leather seats or high-tech gadgets. It just had raw power. When people saw the GTO, they went crazy. They loved the sound of the dual exhaust. They loved how the tires would scream when the light turned green. Pontiac thought they would only sell a few thousand cars. Instead, they sold tens of thousands. This success proved that the youth of America wanted speed more than anything else. Soon, every other car company in Detroit realized they were falling behind. They saw the money Pontiac was making and got jealous. They knew they had to build their own monsters. This was the spark that started the fire. It wasn't just about driving anymore. It was about pride. It was about being the king of the street. The GTO had opened a door that could never be closed again. The era of the muscle car had truly begun, and the competition was about to get very intense. Once the GTO hit the streets, the big three car companies went into a frenzy. Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler were no longer just making cars. They were at war. This time was known as the arms race. If one company built an engine with 300 horsepower, the other company would build one with 350. No one wanted to be second best. In 1964, Ford released the Mustang. It was small, sporty, and very stylish. It wasn't a heavy muscle car at first, but it sold faster than any car in history. Chevrolet saw this and got nervous. They spent 3 years working in secret to build a Mustang killer. In 1967, they finally released the Camaro. Now, the battle was everywhere, on the racetrack, on the street, and in the dealerships. But there was a third player that was even crazier. Chrysler, which owned Dodge and Plymouth, decided to use big engines from their racing cars. They created the famous Hemi engine. This engine was so big and powerful that it looked like it belonged in a tank. When a Dodge Charger or a Plymouth Roadrunner showed up at a stoplight, people got scared. These cars were loud, bright, and very fast. They had funny names and bright colors like Plum Crazy, Purple, and Sublime, Green. The companies even used cartoon characters like the Roadrunner to sell their cars to young people. The motto in Detroit was, "Win on Sunday, sell on Monday." This meant that if a Ford won a race on Sunday, people would rush to buy a Ford the next morning. Dealerships became like playgrounds for speed. You could walk in with a little bit of money and walk out with a machine that could go 100 miles per hour in seconds. It was a time of total freedom. There were no speed cameras and very few rules. The roads belonged to the people with the biggest engines. But while everyone was celebrating, the cars were getting even bigger and more dangerous. The peak of the era was coming, and it was going to be louder than anything before it. By 1969, the car war reached a boiling point. This was the year things went from fast to crazy. The car companies stopped being polite. They wanted to dominate every inch of the road. Chevrolet released the Chevelle SS 454. It had one of the biggest engines ever put in a street car. It was so powerful that it felt like the earth was shaking when you stepped on the gas. Meanwhile, Dodge was building cars that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. They created the Charger Daytona. It had a massive wing on the back that was taller than the roof. It was built to go over 200 miles per hour. This was the golden age of horsepower. You didn't just buy a car for the color, you bought it for the name on the engine. People talked about Cobra jets, six-packs, and Ram Air like they were magic spells. The streets of America became an unofficial drag strip. On Friday nights, thousands of people would line up to watch these heavy metal beasts race from one traffic light to the next. It was a time of bright neon signs, drive-in movies, and the smell of burnt tires in the air. Even the way the cars looked was aggressive. They had hood scoops to suck in air and fat tires to grip the pavement. They looked like predators ready to pounce. It felt like the fun would never end. The car companies were making more money than ever, and the engines were getting larger every month. It was a giant party fueled by cheap gasoline and a need for speed. But as the 1970s approached, the party was about to be crashed. The very things that made these cars famous, their size and their power, were about to become their biggest weakness. Just as the muscle car reached its peak, the world began to change. The first big blow came from insurance companies. They looked at these high-speed machines and saw danger. They started charging young drivers huge amounts of money to own a muscle car. For many people, the insurance cost more than the car payment itself. Suddenly, owning a GTO or a Charger wasn't just a dream, it was an expensive nightmare. At the same time, people started worrying about the environment. These giant engines used a lot of gas and created a lot of smog. In 1970, the government passed the Clean Air Act. This new law forced car makers to clean up their engines. To do this, the engineers had to lower the power. It was like taking a professional athlete and telling them they could only walk, not run. The legendary engines that once roared now sounded like they were whispering. Then, the biggest problem of all arrived, the 1973 oil crisis. Gas became very hard to find. People had to wait in lines for hours just to get a few gallons. The fun was officially over. People traded in their thirsty muscle cars for small, boring cars that saved gas. The bright colors faded, and the loud exhausts went quiet. Huge car factories in Detroit began to close down. The Big Three stopped talking about speed and started talking about miles per gallon. It felt like the lights had been turned off at the world's greatest party. The era of the muscle car didn't just slow down, it crashed into a wall. After the party ended, many of these incredible cars were simply forgotten. They were parked in old barns, covered in dust, or left to rust in backyards. For a long time, people thought they were just old junk. But then, something amazing happened. A new generation realized that these cars were special. They started hunting for them like hidden treasure. This created the barn find craze. People now spend years looking for a dusty car hidden under a tarp, hoping it's a lost legend from the 1960s. Today, these cars are worth a fortune. A car that cost $3,000 in 1969 can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars today. They are symbols of a time when America was bold and unafraid to be loud. We don't build cars like this anymore because the world has changed. But when you see a classic Mustang or a Charger today, you aren't just looking at metal and rubber. You are looking at a piece of history that refused to die. And now, for the secret I promised you at the start of the video. The holy grail of muscle cars is the 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible. Only 11 of these were ever made. It is so rare that one recently sold for several $1 million. It is the ultimate prize for any collector. The era of the 1960s muscle car was short, but it changed the road forever. It was a time when Detroit ruled the world, and for one shining moment, speed was the only thing that mattered. If you could pick any car from this era to park in your driveway, which one would it be? Tell me in the comments below. If you enjoyed this trip back in time, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the greatest moments in history. Thanks for watching, and keep the engine roaring.